stand part of the question, and I call the member for Whitlam.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. It's such a great pleasure to follow the member for Cunningham, my good friend, in talking about local small businesses. We work together as a team, and through the crisis we work with our local organisations. Electorates are lines on the map, but the people who live locally, they might live in one electorate and work in another. They want to see that their local members are working together as a unified team for the local interests, and we've been doing that over the last few months. I'd like to start, given the bill addresses small business, to say a few things about the small business and small business organisations in the Illawarra and Southern Highlands. Well led, very well led. The Illawarra Business Chamber, young, dynamic Chief Executive Officer Adam Zarth has been a great local voice, for small businesses throughout the Illawarra in local and national forums. Good on you, Adam. Great job, well done. Deb Murphy at RDA Illawarra has done a good job bringing together a disparate group of organisations and businesses, trying to put together a constructive and positive plan for how we grow our way out of the current economic problems in the Illawarra. Mark Slay at Destination Wollongong. Like, our local tourism-facing businesses have really had it pretty tough over the last 2.5 months, but Mark, through his regular communication with businesses, the overwhelming majority of whom are small businesses, done a good job, again presenting a positive, optimistic view of the future and some practical tips about how we get through the immediate. So well done, Mark. Steve Rosa up at Destination Southern Highlands, up in the Southern Highlands part of my electorate, and again, like Mark down in the Illawarra, a fantastic job, always positive, a great bloke to get on the end of the line. If you're feeling down in the dumps, always worth having a yarn to Steve about the positive and optimistic future for business in the Southern Highlands. And while I'm thinking about Steve Rosa, I've got to say, it's pie time in the Southern Highlands. So if you're looking for something to do on the weekend, get out to one of the 2 or 3 dozen bakeries, pie shops in the Southern Highlands of New South Wales. Get your laughing gear around a pie from any of these shops. I'm not going to pick a favourite. That'd be reckless, but I can say they are all good, and it's worth the hour drive south of Sydney to get to the Southern Highlands and get involved in the great annual event. Pie time in the Southern Highlands. I'll be there with or without sauce. I also want to give a shout out to some of our local media. The Illawarra Mercury and the Southern Highlands News gone through a change of ownership, pretty disruptive for the businesses and the local staff, had their advertising revenue absolutely smashed, but by jingoes they've done a good job over the last couple of months, telling local stories, promoting local businesses and showing us a way and just reminding us how wonderful it is and how important it is to remember that you don't just belong to an economy, you belong to a community, and they have been a great part of building community. I think Sharon gave a shout-out to Greg Ellis, who's the business editor. Ditto from me, but I also want to give a shout-out to Julian, the editor at the Illawarra Mercury. Great leader of staff and a great leader in the community. You've done a good job. I love your work. I also want to say something about supporting local businesses in the Illawarra and Southern Highlands. I've given a shout out to Pie Time in the Southern Highlands, but I've got to say, on the news last week before I came down here, I was listening and I was hearing stories about all these Sydney-siders who've driven south to spend a few hours in the wonderful village of Berry in my friend and neighbour's electorate of Gilmore. Now, there's rarely a thing that you could find myself and the member for Gilmore indifference on, but I have to say this. When I saw footage of people lining up 20 or 30, 40 metres outside a donut van and outside of every pie shop in Berry, and I was hearing stories that people were waiting an hour or so to get a seat in a restaurant, I couldn't help thinking to myself, you've had to drive through my electorate. And there are some wonderful beaches, some fantastic restaurants, cafes, pie shops, You can get decent donuts, a decent pie in a half a dozen places around the Illawarra. You've had to drive past through them. Yes, I hear the member for Blaxland asking about fish and chips. Look, wonderful place to take your family. The beaches that I go for a run on in the morning, Warilla Beach, local secret. I'm letting you in on the secret. Don't drive all the way to Berry. Drop off in the Illawarra, pull into Shell Harbour, pull into Warilla, pull into any of the one at Windang, my local cafe. Geez, they dropped a T-shirt off. They've done a great COVID-19 issue of their T-shirt, the Dang Cafe. I love their work, and so many great businesses that you can drop into. You don't have to drive that extra hour into my friend's electorate. You can stop in at the Shell Harbour. So all you Sydney-siders who are looking at a place to have a day out on the weekend, think of Shell Harbour, think of the Illawarra, think of my electorate. There's plenty going on there. Now, I want to say something about the bill before the House before somebody pulls me up. I'm being very, very relevant, but maybe not always relevant to the matter before the House. The first rule in politics and the first rule in government is do no harm. And when I turn my attention to the bill before the House, look, it's got great intentions, okay? An important objective of ensuring that small businesses who are particularly doing it tough get paid for the work that they do, get paid for the goods that they deliver. I don't think there's a person in this House who wouldn't share the objective. If you're a small business, you're doing it tough, you probably don't have access to the vast amounts of overflow capital if you're a large business. Now, large businesses have got a whole swathe of mechanisms available to them to smooth their cash flow. If you're a small business, you don't. And if you deliver some goods and you're told you're going to get paid in 30 days, then by God you should get paid in 30 days. Okay? And it's just not reasonable for these large businesses to be using small businesses effectively as their piggy bank to help them smooth their cash flow. Simply not reasonable. So the objective of the bill is good. If I've got a criticism, it actually doesn't go far enough. And it's not just my criticism, Deputy Speaker. Kate Carnell, who often in relation to small business matters speaks a lot of sense. I suspect she's from the, well, I don't suspect, I know she's from the other side of politics, but on small business matters she speaks a lot of sense. And she had this to say about the bill, and I quote, "The payment times reporting framework is a piece of one puzzle, but it won't save the problem of late payment times in its own. Legislation requiring small and medium-sized enterprises to be paid in 30 days is the only way to drive meaningful cultural change in business payment performance across the economy." Now, I think Kate Carnell makes a bit of sense. Legislation requiring prompt payment within 30 days is what's going to drive change here. And it's for this reason that Labor is supporting the bill in the House but referring it to a Senate committee so that we can interrogate how the bill might be improved. And when I read through the details of the bill, I was almost nostalgic for the day that the Treasurer used to come in here in his earlier and more junior roles and celebrate Red Tape Day. I was almost nostalgic for the day when the Treasurer, then the Assistant Treasurer, would stand at the dispatch box and celebrate the removal of commas from legislation as a great achievement in red tape removal. And I look at this bill and I can't help thinking, well, there's a lot of red tape for not much regulatory grunt. So if we've got a criticism, we'd like to see a little bit more grunt for the regulatory package, and it's just not there. So I'm in unison with Kate Carnell, Small Business Ombudsman, on this critical point. A couple of other things I want to say, and I've got to make this point. A bill which has within its title the word transparency, and it seeks to use sunlight and transparency as the regulatory force to make large businesses, businesses over $100 million, pay small businesses, businesses under $10 million, their bills on time, and uses transparency as the tool to deliver that, could probably deliver a bit of transparency in itself. This is a serious point, a very serious point. Too often, in this portfolio, we are seeing legislation which is very, very thin indeed, and all the force and all the work sits in delegated legislation, whether they are rules made by the minister or regulations, or in some instances, powers delegated, extensive powers delegated to the regulator themselves. Now, I have heard, and I can see some reasons why, for flexibility, you might want to do that from time to time. But on these important matters, Parliament has a role. And too often, we are seeing legislation which is very, very thin indeed, and all the regulatory force being delegated to people outside of this place. It means the executive lacks accountability. It means the regulators lack accountability in this place. It's not good enough to say, well, an instrument that they have made is reviewable in the other place. It might be a disallowable instrument. So let this be a warning. Let this be a warning to the drafters of legislation such as this. Too often in this portfolio, bills are being presented within this place which are said to do big, large, powerful things, but those big, large and powerful things are not contained within the legislation. They're delegated elsewhere. I know that I am not the only person who has this concern. I have read concerns from the Senator from New South Wales, Senator Concetta Fierravanti-Wells, who oversees the committee in the other place, who has made similar statements, raised similar concerns. If this place is to be a legislative forum, if this place is to be the place where laws are made, then the detail needs to be within the bill. Let this be a warning to the drafters. There may be an occasion where Labor in this place and another place may agree with the objective of the bill, but we may reject it because the legislation is too thin indeed. This bill comes very, very close to that mark. Can I just finish on a couple of points about doing what you ask other people to do? Now, this is a bill which is about ensuring that big entities pay small entities their bill on time when a service is delivered or goods are provided. A very worthy cause indeed. I'd like to see that the government is doing the same thing itself. Because too often I have heard stories from people who are either clients or service providers for the National Disability Insurance Scheme telling me that they have not had their bills paid on time, and the consequences can be devastating. I have in mind the example of Bruce Mumford, a constituent of mine from the Southern Highlands. I spoke about his case in Parliament earlier this year. Bruce nearly lost his bed. Now, this is a guy who has multiple and significant disabilities, requires a wheelchair for his mobility and a special bed to sleep at night. It was literally being wheeled out the door with no replacement because the bill had not been paid on time. This is not an isolated example with the NDIS. We want to ensure that if government is sending a message to big businesses that bills must be paid on time, then it takes some of its own medicine. And too often in the NDIA, this is not happening. And when you look at the size of the people, the size of the organisations and the employees who are providing services to the NDIA, these are small businesses, sometimes not-for-profit entities. They live from one paycheck to another. And if the bill isn't paid on time, the consequence for that small organisation or that small service provider and the people they are providing a service to can be devastating. So we'll be voting for this bill in this House. We're sending a warning to the government
Order.
about the way they
member's
draft
time
their
has expired.
legislation.
I thank the member for Whitlam for his contribution.